Thank you very much for logging on tonight to Hidden Histories, Urban 15's email, e-magazine that we do on a monthly basis and explores kind of the unusual and almost forgotten parts of San Antonio's cultural, artistic, and social community. Tonight we have a very special show, and it deals with the whole phenomenology and the interest of the UFO experience in San Antonio. We also would like to acknowledge the fact that this is our 8th show of the 12-part series that's part of San Antonio's tricentennial celebration, or as we say, the most recent 300 years of our 10,000-year history. But we want to thank very much all of the people who have contributed into the project so far, the San Antonio Area Foundation, the San Antonio Film Commission, 2 groups in particular that have been very, very helpful in making this a reality. I'd also like to say that today is the 6th of August, and it is a commemorative day in the fact that today nuclear power was born August 6, 1945 in Nagasaki, Japan. And with something that we carry with us as we move more and more into the modern age, we want to keep that benchmark of who we are as a society always in our consciousness, that technology should be used for peace. Tonight's show, we are very blessed in the fact that we have 3 distinct communities in San Antonio. One community is committed to fact-finding, research, analysis, investigation when people say they've had a sighting or an encounter. And that is the MUFON organization, founded in 1969 in Seguin, Texas. And we have guests with us tonight. There's another community, and that's the SETI community, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And it's a large organization worldwide. And they are the receptors. They run the radio telescopes out there, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Egypt, China. And Chinese are planning to build a radio telescope on the dark side of the moon starting next year. But these are the receptor organizations that are looking for signs of intelligence. And every night there's thousands of people watching white noise on their monitors, just waiting for little spikes at certain frequencies. The third community in San Antonio are the alien abduction community. And these people have made contact and they have encountered something. The other, maybe it's the us. So all 3 communities that deal with this phenomena will be represented tonight. And at the end of the night, we have a special guest to help us wrap it up. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the guest from MUFON SA, and that's William Pullen, who's the vice president, and Nikita Kranda, who is the secretary of the organization. And they have come down here to talk with us and talk to the world about what MUFON is all about. MUFON, like I said, was founded in 1969 and was kind of a citizen's reaction to the fact that the government was shutting down and disclaiming any reports that people were making of UFOs. Military people, citizens, scientists were saying there's something happening. And beginning in the 40s into the mid 60s, there was a squelching of that information. So MUFON has become the world's largest database and collection of sightings, and they're founded in Seguin, Texas. And so we have these guests tonight that are going to help us understand the collection process, investigative process, the reporting, and thank you very much for the 2 of y'all being here tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so why do we need MUFON? That's really important to me,
The reasoning behind needing MUFON was established by the military and the government, like you referred to. There was a debunking effort starting in the late 40s, and that resulted in a severe ridicule factor. an individual couldn't talk about a UFO sighting or an experience they encountered without being laughed at. So there's no motivation to speak about what you cited because you were being ridiculed in the greater community. MUFON was established to give people a platform to speak about their sightings and not be laughed at. We take all the sightings, whether local or national level, at face value and simply investigate what is reported to us without making any adjustments, without any kind of predisposed ideas as to what transpires. So it was really the ridicule factor, the idea the military was debunking these things, people couldn't talk about it, and obviously something's occurring that has no answers, so people needed that platform, that's what we provide.
People may not know what MUFON means. What is it? Okay, can you give us it's an acronym, so.
We are the Mutual UFO Network. So not only do people observe these phenomena, but it's our job to record them in a way that is scientific and non-biased, so that these scientists all across the United States can start connecting those dots and start forming the bigger picture, rather than having all of these isolated incidents and nobody talking to one another. We're also a very huge support platform for people that want to come in and they want an empathetic and open place to speak where they know that they will not be ridiculed and they will not be disregarded just for their beliefs. So yeah, I think that we're pretty cool.
Well, pop culture is kind of like demythified and at the same time sort of created spoofs on the whole UFO phenomena. And sometimes it can be a challenge or it can be an opportunity. In terms of pop culture movies, whether it be, Close Encounters or Outer Limits or Twilight Zone or, I Dream of Jeannie or any of those pop culture items, My Favorite Martian. I mean, how does American pop culture and the serious quest for information fit together?
I think that pop culture is wonderful in the fact that it gets people interested and it gets their creative juices flowing, and belief is wonderful. Belief needs to be the fuel and science needs to get you there. So Star Wars, of course, Luke Skywalker is opening himself up to the Force, and George Lucas very heavily drew on Buddhist monks to kind of develop that religion of the Jedi way and the Force. Psychology also ties into that, where we believe that your attitude builds your construct and your preconceived notions of all these things. So I know many people that also love Star Trek. They love Close Encounters of the Third Kind. My favorite movie as a kid was Mars Attacked, which I get heavily judged for in my group. But if it's a great time, that's fantastic. Let it bring us together, and then let's come together in a way of science.
Well, a person comes to you and says, I had an experience. I was down at Pearsall and I saw this watermelon type shape flying through the air, and it lasted for 20 minutes. You do frequently get people who come to you and report incidents of things that are out there?
Yes, usually happens in two ways. One, either an individual will actually look us up on the internet, MUFON.com, and report us. They'll report and testify what transpired to the national group. Or sometimes we get direct sighting reports to us on a local level. After that, the case is assigned a number, and if it comes from the national group, it's brought to the state director, then the city director. We take care of it, and we start an investigation. If it comes directly to us, it kind of shortcuts that, and we immediately start to investigate it. So we take it at face value and simply apply the scientific method to find out what transpired, and we always follow through. Everything is always very cut and dry in our approach, but everything is discreet. The individual's name, address, phone number, all that contact information is discreetly kept between that person and ourselves. So they're not under any risk of being ridiculed in that way. And then we always make a point of following through. If an individual brings us a sighting or something that they testified about, then we follow through and contact them with the results of our investigation. So they're not left hanging.
Plus, we want to hear every story. It doesn't matter if you saw something very small or you saw something significant. That person could be the link to blowing open a huge case for us that we never even knew about. So it's very important for people to feel comfortable and that they will not be judged and that they will not be treated with any preconceived biases. We want to hear your story, whether it be through email or in person or over the phone or even through a Facebook message. please talk to us. We are indeed human beings.
You know, my first, you might say, experiences with the UFO community began with Alan Dale. He was a radio personality here in San Antonio with KITE radio and later with WI. And he had a Sunday show, it was a call-in show, asking, this was in the mid-60s, maybe through about 67 or 68, where he would ask people to give him reports. And it was a fascinating Sunday show, Coast to Coast or something like that. But he later took me to my first MUFON meeting in Seguin, and that would have been about 1969 or 70. And at that time, the general attitude was that a person had a mental health problem, or they're imagining this, or they were suffering from just coming back from Vietnam, and it was in their fantasies. That attitude of the public has sort of been has shifted. Do you know why has the public become more attuned or sympathetic, or what's going on here?
Astrologists would call it the age of the Aquarius, psychologists and everyone else. A lot of people like to attain this to the awakening of humanity. Us at MUFON, we like to think that people are awakening in many ways. Perhaps they're awakening to the transparency of their government and that things are going on that they don't understand. Perhaps they're awakening to the fact that our planet really is in trouble and that we have to start paying attention to that. But I think that many more people are going to start noticing things that have been happening for a long time, and they're going to start coming forward about that and being more and more comfortable.
And on a societal level, what's been transpiring these last few decades is that people have become less trusting of the government. People are becoming less trusting of the military. Just after World War II, we'd won the greatest battle in the history of the planet. Americans trusted their government. They trusted their military. And the history of what's transpired since then that has nothing to do about UFOs has made the public distrusting of their leaders. And so when people are experiencing these things are being experienced by military personnel. These things are being experienced by politicians of both political aisles. So something's going on, and not having a platform to talk about these things is very problematic. And we try to provide that so that everybody from all walks of life could talk about the way they've gone through. And the way the media, movies have all influenced that. We've all been talking about ETs for many, many decades. And the majority of Americans are very comfortable with that.
I assume that the Old Testament was full of sightings, because you have all these flaming chariots taking prophets from here to there across the skies, and comets guiding the Magi across the desert, and all of these things that are celestial could be possibly life forms rather than just mythology or analogy or metaphors.
Sure.
And we find, in reading that as early as 1890, the first UFO sighting in San Antonio takes place. And so it is something that's been going on, but it's taken an organization like you to codify it and to document it.
Yeah, it's almost, if each of us lives in a neighborhood and we call the police for something that's transpiring down the neighborhood, if the police don't follow through, or if they won't take our information, it leaves us with a bad taste in our mouth. So that kind of transfers to if a person has a sighting or something occurs in their life and they have no avenue to testify about that, where do they go? There's nowhere to go. And certainly things have changed for the better. We've still got a long way to go. The ridicule factor is still out there, but having an avenue to speak about these things is a big deal. Because like you said, virtually every religious text in history, no matter how far back you go, describes events that are certainly non-mundane, which may not be able to be assigned to an astronomical event. There may have been alien visitation back then. So the scenario's been there for a long time.
Also, the similarities between ancient civilizations that would have had no way to have had contact with one another, like in Egypt and so on and so forth, their pictures, before they even had words, display very similar things. Now, is that something that we can scientifically say, yes, this is for sure? Not yet. No, we can't. But it's certainly something that MUFON does keep in the back of their mind when we look at new evidence along with old evidence. So we try to keep that in a good balance.
Well, I see where science and faith and mythology and just natural observation all have to be merge and work together if we're going to get grip on this. And this is a perfect way to introduce the other community, and that's the group of scientists that are highly funded by national governments and think tanks, and that's the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. In fact, Southwest Research here in San Antonio has a number of projects that they're doing, radio telescopes and deep probe satellites that are going out there with the sole purpose of looking for signal. Mm-hmm. And looking for signal is often a monastic thing because, like I said, people are looking at their screens just looking for a glitch in the frequency, a little bit of change of amplitude in the middle of the night. Yeah. It's something out there. And we're lucky enough to meet with the Reverend John Fluth. He's a pastor of the First United Methodist Church in Del Rio. He's from San Antonio, and his mom still lives here, and he went to Our Lady of the Lake, and that's when he got involved with the SETI movement. And he is one of those people who has multiple computers at his house and is connected directly into the radio telescope there in Puerto Rico. And he's unable to be with us tonight, but we were lucky. He drove into town, and we brought up the subject of what is out there. And he has a different perspective. You are looking for details about the event after it happens. What he's dealing with is he's a receptor, and he wants to make sure that we as a society are ready when contact occurs. So why don't we spend a little time? We have 16 minutes that we've edited from his wonderful, wonderful afternoon with us.
SETI is an active search in deep space of radio signals that would indicate that there is intelligent life. And that's according to what we understand that intelligent life would be producing. Certain radio signals, it may not be that, and maybe people communicate by telepathy for all I know, but anyway. SETI is on the principle that intelligent life would be producing radio signals that we could detect by filtering out normal background noise in space. I don't think that SETI is set up in any way to detect if there was a UFO in our skies, that we wouldn't have any way of even knowing it through SETI. It's something completely different. And then also on SETI, 4 computers have to agree that the signal has come out of, for instance, most of what I work with, there's a huge radio telescope in Arecibo in Puerto Rico. It downloads signals, say, from one of the identified planets that may support life. This signal goes to Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, and it's chopped up into little pieces. It goes off to, let's say, each little segment would go to 4 different computers, and those 4 computers would have to agree upon that by filtering out normal background noise, they have all 4 detected some unusual signal that may indicate intelligent life. SETI first was just a concept that if we had the computers, and we didn't really have access to computers, then there were a few computers that we could get access to on college campuses, and there was very little research that was being done because computer time was so expensive. Now through SETI at Home, anyone who has a powerful computer, and powerful in the old days, the old IBM 3033, for instance, mainframe, is nothing compared to even our cell phones. So SETI at Home allows its groups of 4 to work on the same signal from a radio telescope and try to filter out normal background noise looking for intelligent life out in deep space. We have, when I was young, at that age, there were 9 planets in the universe. That's what was taught. 9 planets in the universe. And then there became 8. And then with advent of things like the Hubble Space Telescope, radio telescopes, such as an Arecibo, we now have discovered over 3,500 planets. There are many more. When the West Space Telescope is deployed, when the Chinese deploy a radio telescope on what we call the dark side of the moon, we may find that there are millions, if not billions, of planets. And so far, we've identified over 30 planets that could support life. It's a different game right now than there ever was before, and it's continuing to progress through efforts such as SETI. SETI itself has been going on for decades, and what keeps people going on this search where there isn't anything that's really been found? To my knowledge, there hasn't been anything found. There are just rumors and legend that something has actually been found, but that information hasn't been divulged. That's one of the things that keeps me interested, is that for all I know, one of my computers has found something along with other people. There have been people who individually have found things within SETI, but it hasn't been confirmed by other computers. So to me, the search is as fascinating as finding it. I just love the search. I love building computers. I love souping up computers to make them do more. I love NVIDIA cards, the video card company NVIDIA. And what I like to do is I take it and overclock it. I run it 24 hours, 7 days a week at 100%. And then I just literally burn it up, searching in SETI. Intel processors. I haven't been able to burn up Intel processors, but I run them for all they're worth and continue. And so part of my joy is just sitting alone, building up computers, seeing everything I can get out of a computer on that search. There was a time where people were burnt at the stake for implying that there was life on other planets. Yes, there were times when this was a very difficult subject. But where I live right now, it's encouraged. People ask me questions. I've talked to people in different faiths within our own community, and they've all have been fascinated by it. Before I talked about this, I talked to the bishop of our church, our district superintendent. I said, is this all right, or is this going to reflect poorly on our church? Both encouraged me. There was a time where I could have been burnt on the stake for saying this. The question is, how should we react when contact is made? First of all, let's just fantasize. It's in front of Alamo Plaza. There are a news crews covering some other event. So it's being broadcast potentially all over the world. How would we react if a UFO landed and someone came out? Would we look at this person as them? Or would we consider this person as to be one of us? So what would be the name that we would have for this person? Would we say it's another person? Would we say it's us? Also, religion in itself sometimes is divisive. We look at Protestant versus Catholic sometimes as us and them. Would we look at this person and say, this is also one of God's creations, just as we are? When we talked about our own faith to this person who's one of us, if we talked about our faith, much of our faith in Christianity revolves around original sin. Would this person have any concept of original sin from their own world. If they didn't, would they consider us to be lesser than them because we had original sin and maybe they never had the concept of original sin? Would they consider us to be tainted or evil in some way from this concept of original sin? So much of our religion is geocentric. For instance, some faiths pray towards the east. What if there was no east there? Or prayers different times during the day. What if their day was a 48-hour day? Could they easily relate to what we're talking about on a geocentric or us and them or original sin faith? And if their faith wasn't exactly the same, could we still continue to say, this is us who have come to us? There are probably life on other planets throughout the universe, and planets we may not have ever discovered. There are serious theological questions, serious religious questions about that. What are some spiritual concepts of what might happen when we make contact? And I really believe it will be that when, not if, we make contact. I also believe that we have made contact in the past, but recognizing it, that contact is difficult. And also, how in religion would we deal with publicly recognizing that there has been contact in the past or will be contact? What do we call these people? There were times in the past where different faiths didn't consider people who didn't look exactly like the leaders of that faith to have a soul or to have less of a soul than them. And those are terrible times. I hope that we have all grown out of those times. But could we look at us who have come from another planet and say, they are us, rather than saying, as we had in the past, they don't have the same faith, so they're not as religious as us, or valuable as us, or not even having the same soul as we do. And what a terrible event it would be if anyone used their faith to subjugate, to put down people who are us from another planet. All creatures are and have God within them. It's my belief that God created the heavens and the earth. That's Genesis 1. That God created everything, and that's part of my faith. And so there's part of God in bugs or dogs or all creatures, great and small. And in that concept, intelligent life on other planets were part of that creation, and the planets themselves are part of that creation. And perhaps I would follow that concept, for instance, that the Buddhists have of there being a spirit of God within everything. Whoever is in power over the military says what is real and what needs to be done. But let's just say I was given that task. First of all, to try to establish communication when someone came, to see what ways that this person communicated. For all we know, it would be English like we use right now. I would just say, when we look at the old movies, often when the UFO landed, there was gunplay. And I hope we move beyond that. The X-Files also talks about this strange mandate to shoot any alien life that landed. I don't know that ever was real, but whatever would happen now, I would hope that it would be a real effort to establish communications and ask questions. If this life has come that far through space, they are at a higher developmental level than we are. And by being in a higher developmental level than we are, I don't know that we would have any defense whatsoever against these people. We would have to be using logic. If that we make contact, well, my response is we will make contact. It's my belief that we will make contact. And will it happen? It could be happening on Alamo Plaza right now for all I know. If I was invited to be part of that event, first of all, I would just be utterly delighted. Would there be any danger involved? Well, if there was, bring it on. I think that if people from another planet were coming here to destroy us, there wouldn't be much we could do. And if they're there trying to communicate, this would be a really good sign. My question to this person as a religious leader would be, what does faith mean to you? I would hope they could speak English or some language you could communicate with. And I would talk about original sin. What if they knew about original sin already? What if they knew the Adam and Eve story or something similar to it? And what would be the religious implications of that? That would be huge, the concept that God had perhaps had as part of humanity the concept of original sin in planets in multiple places. The religious implications of that would be huge. Also, what is their concept of God? And I think I would want more to listen at first, to learn, and be delighted by listening, by continuing to ask questions about their faith, how they feel about other people. Are there advancements in humanity there that we could learn from? The concept of people from other planets being us, but just on another planet, to me is just adding some vibrance to meeting people. We're talking people from another planet. They may not look like us, they may not be the same color, but also if we think of people from another planet as us, how can we look at someone on our own planet and not say us?
So here we are with, we've just heard the Reverend John Fluth speak to us a lot about the faith aspect of contact and encounter. So I come to you with, again, back to my little story of I'm in Pearsall and I see this elongated shape and I bring you the story. What does MUFON do with that conversation?
It depends on, well, we have a set of criteria how we investigate a case. Whether the person calls us directly at the local group or contacts MUFON.com at the national level. Eventually the case is assigned a case number. It whittles it down, way down to the organization, to the local levels. And then we assign a field investigator to each case. That investigator will investigate weather phenomenon on the date, if there was commercial air traffic, military air traffic. He or she will visit the physical site to try to ascertain whether there's any physical evidence left behind, and go through the entire motion of applying the scientific method to whittle down possibilities. Going into that, we go into it with an open mind, thinking, okay, we have no idea what transpired. Therefore, we use that method to eliminate possibilities. For example, it might not be a weather balloon, it may not be a helicopter, it may not be a flight of birds or a Chinese lantern. So that those explanations are cast aside, and we whittle it down to a lower and lower number of possibilities. Rarely do we get to definitively explain a case. On occasion we do. But it comes down to about a 5% total of cases that we cannot explain in any way, shape, or form.
So is there some kind of national protocol that's being developed that can be used in Minnesota or in Oaxaca or Texas? Or are there some kind of questions that you ask of the person? Exactly.
That's correct. Our investigators are certainly vetted before we trust them with going out and listening to these stories and recording it down. Part of the freedom that we have as our separate chapters is that there is no set protocol. We are trusted, with our staff and everyone else, that we will ask pertinent questions that are non-leading, and that we will try to go about it in a gentle way, because of course there could also be trauma with these sightings. It's a very terrifying thing, especially for a young child, to see a craft or an alien being or whatever in their backyard. So of course there comes the option of, we want to get as much pertinent information as we can, and then we want to go ahead and move forward with researching that and getting as much of the truth as we possibly can as far as that person interprets it.
You just said that a young person seen an object in their backyard. What is the youngest age that you've ever had, at least in this local chapter, to discuss?
Oh, for goodness sake.
I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt.
I can answer for Colorado Springs. I had a 2-year-old that all the time would tell me that she saw stuff up in the sky. Now, we have had 3 airports. We have 3 Air Force bases in Colorado Springs. But the things that she would describe to me, and we didn't watch that much TV, it was bizarre. So I don't know the absolute youngest age, but I believe we've had a minor that had permission from their parents to go on record, and they were as young as 10 or 11.
It runs the entire age range pretty much.
Yes.
The UFO phenomenon is not gender, age, political affiliation, religious beliefs. It's non-specific. It runs the entire gamut.
So you've gone out, you've asked the questions, you've met with the person, you go to the site, you do some investigation of the physical nature of the site and what could possibly happen. Where does that information go from there?
Once the case has been investigated to the furthest degree, which of course is all dependent on the amount of evidence that's brought to us, that case is usually closed and attached an explanation or at least a synopsis of how far we were able to push it, and then it's uploaded into the Greater MUFON website, the Greater MUFON database of all the investigations that have been completed, and it's stored there, and it's accessible to other researchers for further research purposes. So that's where it ends up.
So what qualifies me as a researcher? Do I become a member? Do I have to pay, like when I do with National Archives in Lawton, Virginia, I have to pay a card for me to go in?
Well, the Greater database is available to researchers whether they are MUFON members or not. Our field researchers have to be a MUFON member, and they go to a field researcher. They have a manual, they have a testing criteria they have to pass. For lack of a better term, there's a school they have to go through, a whole set amount of testing to get certified. But as far as other researchers, any researcher, MUFON affiliated or not, has access to that information.
To just have access to our sequence numbers and to see our reports, you just have to have access to the internet. You can go on the MUFON website and you can look up local sightings by state, by chapter, whatever, and you can actually see what we've been reporting. It's that easy.
So there, you have a monthly meeting, you have a website, you have email, sometimes you might even have phone numbers. People can contact you. Is there anything that you need to let San Antonio know right now? We have an opportunity here about how are the ways you're servicing that community?
We always follow through. We provide a platform so anybody can describe any scenario they've undergone, any kind of experience. We always investigate every case that comes to us, and we always follow through and give that person either an email or a call to let them know what the results of the information and the investigation was. We never leave anybody hanging, and we never ridicule anybody in any way, shape, or form, and everything is always done discreetly.
Well, speaking of discreetly, one of the, most people were afraid to admit at some point in our history that they had had an abduction experience. And this was blown entirely wide open, though, when Whitley Strieber wrote Communion. It suddenly became an international bestseller where he described his abduction experiences. And this was not something that was reported discreetly to MUFON or to anyone in particular, but he actually admitted to the world and described in very accurate detail things that happened. And as a result of it, thousands of people have now opened their hearts and they've opened up their memories to things as well. Whitley is a San Antonio boy, and his experiences in San Antonio are related in his book, particularly with Almost Park and the numbers of people that he was involved with there. He is a dear friend and has been very helpful in my own path in dealing with some of these experiences. We invited him to come today, but he's on a book tour. But last Friday we were able to talk to him, and we recorded him in L.A. And there were some really important things that he brought up about his experience since he's written the book. Nikita, I'm sorry, what?
To elucidate on one more thing that William was saying before we finish, we are a service to our community. We are not a big, scary organization that is MUFON. We are a local chapter made up of local people. If you want someone to talk to, and someone that will believe you, and someone that will listen, we will do that. We don't have to file a report to MUFON. We never have to know your name. If you want to talk, we will listen. That's what our chapter is for. It's for you. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. Because this was not in place for everybody years ago.
Correct.
And so, again, going back to Whitley's scenario, he kind of blew the lid off of the privacy and the silence,
Yes.
the silent factor. And here we have a writer who, well-known, bestseller list, and then he moves into this autobiographical content. So last week we talked to him, and we basically asked him what has been the impact of his book, what has been the impact on him of the popularity of that major book, and where is he going right now with this research and the development of his ideas. So we talked to him for almost an hour, but we were able to get down to about 25 minutes of really concise thoughts. And this is the third community. This is the ones that have made contact and had an encounter. And it's the third part of San Antonio's abduction, UFO, intelligence, probing community.
When I first had this experience of what appeared to be a close encounter of the third kind, my initial reaction was that it had to be some kind of a nightmare, or because it was so vivid, maybe even a psychotic break. I realized that wasn't the case eventually, over a period of weeks of medical testing and so forth. I had to face the fact that on some level it had been real, but what was that? And I began after a while to get into the UFO literature, and what I saw was what appeared to me to be a sort of extension of older folklores of various kinds. You know, we believed in the 19th century in the fairy folk, and then in the 20th century, if you looked carefully in the literature of the past, you could see that even the visitors that we were seeing were similar to what people had described back then. The fairy folk, the fairy literature, has nothing to do with Tinkerbell, believe me. It's very dark, ominous literature for the most part. And so I thought to myself, well, I don't want to extend this folklore. My wife, Anne, was very much involved, and we formulated a series of questions. And what we tried to do were two things. One, we tried to make it clear that this was something. It was an experience. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a lie. It was a real experience that a lot more people were having than anyone realized. And number two, that it was way too early to say what it was. Because if we did that, we would just be repeating history, which is turning it into another folklore. The Communion book did a couple of things. First, it made a kind of dent in this assumption that it's definitely aliens from another planet. And two, it brought into general consciousness the concept that this might be something real and something very different from what we would normally assume, which is dreams and imagination and storytelling and so forth. So the question then became what to do with this. But I wasn't really able to engage the intellectual and scientific communities, the academic community, very effectively in those days, because I was kind of overwhelmed with this tide of media interest in the possibility of aliens from another planet, and nothing else occurred to them, and that's all that really got out into the media. Now things have quieted down, and I'm making some headway in those areas. But that was where it started, and that was what I was initially interested in doing with this experience. I think that this experience has been with us for a very long time. Jacques Vallée, who is a friend of mine now, and wrote a very important book about this called Passport to Magonia, which compared essentially modern UFO lore to the folklore of the past, the fairy lore and the other folklores. But it's extremely important to understand something that I think that we've kind of missed. The intellectual and community, the academic community, anthropologists and so forth have missed something. And that is that folklores don't come out of the imagination. Folklores are generated by people trying to explain things they can't understand. This is where folklore comes from. And once we start to look objectively at what it is they're seeing, because we're seeing it right now. I saw it. I woke up in a room full of this folklore in the form of what appeared to be aliens in December of 1985. I have them in my life still to this day. So there's something real there. And we have the opportunity to take an objective look at it. And my mission in life is to try to get these very wary communities to take a more objective look at it, because there is certainly good anthropology and social science to be done in this area. It's never been done. The academic community has numerous ways into it, some of which are beginning to be pursued. Dr. Jeff Kripal, who wrote the book Supernatural, A New Vision of the Unexplained with me, is an academician who is beginning to realize that there are ways of addressing mythology that don't start with the assumption that it's all in the person's head, any more than the vision, for example, of Ezekiel, as you refer to things in the distant past, probably wasn't something in his head. It's probably something that happened. It may very well have been an alien contact, because this is a huge universe. And if there are ways of moving around in it that are practical, and we don't know of any at the present time, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any, then probably from time to time, other entities have been here. I think we should think carefully about the fact that they appear to have been very circumspect and not just come out and said hello to us. And we have to wonder then, do we have some sort of a problem that we're not aware of? Are they scared of us? Or exactly what is it that keeps them hidden? But yeah, I would think that from time to time in the past, this has probably happened and been recorded in various ways, in very ineffective ways, like, what Ezekiel thought he saw and what was probably there were probably two quite different things. I mean, he saw a heavenly vision of some sort, but what was probably there were just some very likely tired people doing a difficult job, or beings, I should say, doing a difficult job observing events on a rather minor little planet that had not progressed very far at that point. Well, I don't think it is a question of faith, at least I hope not, because haven't we done that for a long time? I do interact with people in these areas extensively, and there are two directions that are being pursued now scientifically that I know of. One is analysis of materials that have been gathered in various places that are believed with good reason to be materials from spacecraft or some kind of craft that have crashed. And two is analysis of the DNA of the brains and to an extent of the social interactions of people who have had close encounter experiences. Those two areas are being actively pursued scientifically right now. As far as the results of this research are concerned, Dr. Vallée, who I made reference to earlier, has done isotopic analysis on some of the materials, and to everyone's astonishment, it was discovered that the isotopes in these pieces of metal were not only not of this Earth, but they couldn't have even been produced in this universe as we understand it. So where are they from, and how were they made, and above all, why? Since the metal doesn't have any properties aside from its peculiar isotopic structure that we can identify that are different from the properties of metal with ordinary isotopes, or ordinary Earth-based isotopes. Now, does this mean that there is such a thing as a parallel universe that actually can project itself in some way physically into our reality at times? There have been some suggestions in the data that's being collected by the CERN Super Collider in Switzerland that parallel universes in some way might be real, but we don't have any concrete evidence at all of this, let alone the idea that anything could ever pass between parallel universes. And yet, this is, speaking of universes, the one we live in is awfully old. And it's so old and so big that one of the scientists I work with said, he said, I think that everything is true. And you don't even need parallel universes to support that argument, because this universe is so big that essentially everything probably happens here. Everything that can happen does. May of 1994, something was put into my left ear on a May night. I was awake when it happened. I was awakened, I should say, by the approach of these people to the house. They weren't aliens. There was something funny with them, some strange presence with them, but it was basically a man and a woman. And they came rushing into the bedroom. And the next thing I knew, I was immobilized, and they were pressing, I was lying on my right side, and they were pressing my head against the pillow from my left side. And the next afternoon, after it became obvious that it was not a dream. It was actually obvious from the first, frankly. I still to this day remember exactly what they looked like. They were people. That there was something embedded in my ear. There was no scar or anything. It was a little sore was all. So we moved from upstate New York. We lost our cabin because of financial setbacks, and moved to San Antonio, back home, more or less with our tails between our legs. And I met a doctor, John Lerma, who agreed to try to take the thing out. And he didn't really know what it was. In other words, he was aware of the communion book, and he probably had suspicions at the time, but he was basically doing what he thought was a surgery on a little cyst that was bothering me. When he opened it up, he saw a white disc. And when he touched it with his scalpel, it went down from where it is now here. It moved down under the skin of the ear into the lobe. and he withdrew because he said, obviously I can't do anything with this because I am going to would have to take off your entire ear. And so he sewed it up again, but he did get a little piece of it. It was analyzed in a laboratory and found that it had Proteinaceous cilia embedded in a metallic base. And 2 days after this surgical attempt to remove it, it moved back from my earlobe back up to here at the top of my ear where it is now. It has remained there ever since because I did not wish to challenge it any further. And over the years, I have gradually learned how to use it. When I want to use it, when I'm writing, it will open up a little kind of slit in my eye and you see letters racing past at breakneck speed. You can't really read them, not consciously, but it will direct me toward research for my books. And it has become the best possible research tool. It's far, far better than Google because it's even very intuitive. I wrote a big 2-volume historical novel called In Hitler's House, which I published under my open pseudonym of Jonathan Lane, simply because I could do it. I could do it, and if people read this book and they get it on Amazon, I don't think it's available in any bookstores. I have no idea how to sell books into bookstores, and I published it myself. So they say, in these book reviews, they say it's like it was real, like it really happened. It's hard to believe it didn't happen. And that was how it feels to do this, work with this thing, because it projects you anywhere you want to go in terms of history and so forth. It's quite wonderful. So as a writer's tool, it's fabulous. I have no idea what else it does, but Anne's intuition was always don't take it out. And now I'm glad I didn't, because I suspect it may have some role in facilitating my relationship with her and other extraordinary relationships I've had over the years. So it turns out to be an incredible gift, in my opinion. San Antonio is quite fascinating, and the whole area is. And it's interesting that the geology of that part of Texas and the geology of the part of England where all those crop circles appear is very similar. It's limestone. It's underneath it is all limestone. And maybe that's got something to do with it. I don't know. But the secret school was the strangest experience you can imagine, because it started with when I was under hypnosis with Dr. Donald Klein at New York State Department of Psychiatry. He asked me at one point my age, and I was astonished to hear my own voice say 12 in this little old-fashioned South Texas little boy voice. And that led me to a very magical time in my own life where I was back when I was 10 and 11 and 12, and I began to remember going into the Almas Basin up behind what was then the old Sisters' Home in Incarnate Word, and sitting and meeting this person, hooded, dark person who taught things and extraordinary things at night. And I could not believe how would any little boy do that. It was impossible to believe. I think maybe I actually was there, and that a nun used to sit out there on these benches and teach us about the stars and so forth. In other words, there may have been a very different reality to it that kind of in my child's imagination changed into something a little bit different and more romantic. But in any case, I found the old benches there one day, and the marvelous tree that we used to lean our bikes against before walking up there to the benches. And I was very perplexed because I didn't see how it could really have happened in the real world, which I point out in the book. But then after the book was finished, I found the actual place. It was just wonderful. What an extraordinary experience. And San Antonio is very extraordinary and special. It's also a place where so many different cultures have come together, and each one bringing its own magic with it. So I think it's quite extraordinary and quite special. But I don't think that there is any indication that there is any kind of spike in like close encounter witness and so forth in San Antonio. A lot of UFO sightings there, that's for sure. And the first real UFO sightings that took place in this country were these airship events in the 1890s. One of which, the first one of which actually occurred in San Antonio, and my friend Ed Conroy, who wrote the book Report on Communion about me, did some research and discovered that the airship had actually passed directly over my great-grandmother's old house on St. Mary's, which is now Providence High School. So there's all kinds of cool stuff like that about San Antonio. You can all be sure if you're living there, you're living in a terrifically interesting place. After we published Communion, which Anne had an enormous role in writing Communion, we began to get letters by the tens and then hundreds of thousands from people who had read the book and had similar experiences. And Anne read all of these letters. Anne was the sort of person who was not going to let, if someone sat down to write us a letter, she was going to be sure that person got their moment and got it read, at least, if not replied to. And one day after reading, I guess she'd been working on this for 3 or 4 years and probably read, 50,000 letters at that point, I would guess, 25,000, I don't know how. She read them very quickly, and she was a very fast reader, just naturally. She could sit down and read a novel in an afternoon quite easily. In any case, she came out of her office one day and said, "Whitley, this has something to do with what we call death." From there, Annie gradually became a real expert on the afterlife and what it is. And then in 2004, she had a hemorrhagic stroke and a terrifically powerful near-death experience. And where she saw people sort of sitting in something like a train station clutching these burdens. And she realized as she came back that we have to let the burdens of life go or we can't move beyond it. And that became her message for the rest of her own life. After Anne died, a remarkable thing started to happen. I started to get phone calls, the first one at 9:30 at night of the evening she died, and she hadn't died even 2 hours before, from friends who would say, "Oh, Whitley, I just had the strangest thing happen. I heard Anne's voice telling me to call you." This was the first story mentioned in Afterlife Revolution with Belle Fuller, who is a friend of ours. And Belle heard Anne as sort of psychic, and she heard Anne say that she didn't even know Anne had passed away. And so I said to Belle, "Anne died a few hours ago, an hour and a half ago." And that was only the first of a number of such instances. And about the third or fourth one, I remembered that Anne and I had had a brief conversation in the 90s about if there was an afterlife and we could still communicate. That the one to die first would try to communicate with the one still alive through friends rather than directly, because neither one of us would ever believe a direct communication. We would think it was our imagination. And I thought, my God, she's doing it. She's doing it. And that began what turned into the Afterlife Revolution that Gary Schwartz, who wrote the foreword, Dr. Schwartz is a specialist on this type of study of this sort of thing, said it's one of the most convincing cases of contact, afterlife contact, that's ever occurred. And she was just turned out to be remarkably good at it. Completely revised my own understanding of what we are. Because if there really is an afterlife, and now I think that's true, then a lot of us are missing the point about what this all is. Another interesting thing that Anne said, though, because it always, when you say afterlife, after a few seconds, it leads to the various belief systems that we all have now. The Christian belief or Hindu or Buddhism or whatever belief system we may have. Anne said a fascinating thing. She's spoken to me now that we've gotten a little bit more, I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with talking to somebody who's not physically alive and feeling sometimes that what's being said is really not coming from my own head, because I'm not the kind of person who's going to be very readily pulled into something like channeling. I mean, I have to have some proof. But in any case, something she said was so trenchant and so important, I think I want to say it here, in relation to all of this. That is that the human species is too young to have beliefs. If you don't have a grounding in the truth, you shouldn't believe anything. And that is really Anne's message and my message, and it's the message of the Afterlife Revolution, which says, open your eyes. There is something extraordinary here. But at the same time, don't jump too far forward. Don't turn it into beliefs. Just realize that what is so extraordinary here, it's not aliens from another planet. It's not people from parallel universes or some magical beings or anything. It's us. We're the magical beings. We are what is extraordinary here. That was her message, and it's the message of the Afterlife Revolution, too. The question has gradually shifted from who are they to who are we, because this has got an awful lot to do with us. I'm not absolutely sure at this point that this physical form that we're in is the only physical form that the human species takes. I think that we might be very different from what we think, because look at nature. How could any caterpillar ever imagine that he would become a butterfly? It is beyond imagination. And I suspect that if we ever get this figured out, we're going to find out that the wizard in the center of Oz is us, I think. I have a very definite feeling that, as you get deeply enough into this and live the life like I've lived in deep meditation and contemplation for a long time, you get to the point where the whole alien-human dichotomy is completely meaningless. There are no aliens. There's one universe, and we're all in it.
We have navigated a lot of territory tonight, and we're going to have to land someplace to put this all together. And I promised that we would have a guest tonight to help me put it and weave and make a quilt out of all the communities that have been represented tonight. And Ed Conroy, who is the author of a number of critical and theoretical books, and he wrote the report on communion, which was a very powerful book that allowed us who didn't understand communion to understand communion. So when we read it the third time, it made sense. And Ed is with us tonight. And one of the things that I would like your help on is we have these three communities that were represented tonight. Those who are looking for facts and trying to investigate and authenticate. We have the group that's dealing with how does this affect our spirituality? And then we have what Whitley said right now, that this is a group that has gone beyond and now is coming to the realization that there are no aliens, it's just us. And how we perceive of the other is how we perceive of ourselves. I mean, this is like Desjardins meets John Lennon meets Frank Zappa with Marcel Duchamp. It's everything is everywhere. So Ed, I need your help. And I'm sure everybody else does.
Well, thank you, George, for inviting me, and Kat as well. And I just want to express appreciation to everybody who has spoken here tonight, because it takes courage to ask these questions, and it takes courage to create an organization like MUFON, which defied the ridicule back in the day when it was hard to do so, and has had a steady progression of creating this incredible case log that, for anyone who takes the time to look at it, will prove that thousands and thousands of people are having extraordinary experiences, and that they're processing them themselves in extraordinarily different ways. Likewise, the SETI community is trying to create a standard of objective knowledge that will allow the scientific community, which is far more empirically oriented and wants hard proof, to open up the idea of communication. Because not only is there the idea that, okay, we're gonna, prove that they're out there, but hopefully maybe we could communicate with them if we're out there. When I was a boy, I was fascinated with that, and I tried to make a microwave transmitter, and I didn't have the money for all the equipment, but I find that fascinating. And then Whitley is such an extraordinary case because he blew open, as you said earlier, the entire communication dynamic in the mass media. Because he refused to use the term alien, he refused to use the term extraterrestrial, he insisted on calling the people he met visitors, and he regards them as people. And because he talked about his experiences in terms of the collective unconscious, and he also talked about the fact that these experiences often happen in alternative states of consciousness, where what we think we're seeing is not necessarily what we're seeing. He raised the whole question of the relationship of the phenomenon to human consciousness itself, and saw it as kind of a spur to the evolution of consciousness. And everything that he has written since then is about how these people with whom he entered into a communion, and he just described how that communion works now because of the implant, this psychic communion, spiritual communion, has transformed his life and transformed Anne's life. I knew Whitley extremely well back in the day. He introduced me to my late ex-wife, Dora Ruffner, and I'm very grateful to him for that. And so I watched him go through years of, the transformations that he went through in the book he wrote, After Communion Transformation. His novels, his work have shown a deep, deep interest in this in every way. And he has gone deeply into the military connection to this. It's in his own family. He wrote a novel about Roswell. Much of what he knows, he has written about in fiction. So it's worth reading his fiction to go more deeply into the things that he's not willing to talk about as in terms of fact. But the most significant thing, of course, is that Whitley has now taken the dimension of his experience into the realm of the human soul. What is the nature of the soul? And his communication with Anne. So I respect the fact that he has broken another taboo, which is to talk about the possibility of communication with the deceased. It should be said, with respect to all of the intellectual community in the world, that's still in academia, most people just refuse to talk about these things. I mean, it could kill your career to really, go seriously into these realms in most places. One exception is his good friend Jeffrey Kripal, who is the, a distinguished religious scholar at Rice University, with whom Whitley has written a book about the significance of these things, and I highly recommend that, The Supernatural. I reviewed it for the Express News. And that is an open call to the larger intellectual community to talk about these things, which we really need, because, as we were saying earlier, we need all voices. We need to expand the dialogue, which is what we're doing here.
Well, so much of this conversation and of this experience for many in the society, it's a spectator situation
Right.
because they haven't experienced something like this, or they have not admitted that they experienced it yet.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do is draw out the possibility that this higher consciousness level is just a natural phenomenon in San Antonio and this river valley. And that's what the Hidden Histories has been trying to do, is find those little pockets of whatevers, you know, and bring them up to the surface, because there's a lot more to San Antonio than just 1836.
Absolutely. And that word courage that I was using, I mean, definitely the defenders of the Alamo had courage, but, you know, there's kind of a chutzpah that San Antonians have, that, you know, to defy convention, to be ourselves, to ask unconventional questions. So, yeah, definitely, I think all this fits into that.
So if we could take this dialogue to another space, another kind, we only had time for 3 communities. Can you talk about other communities within, you know, our locale that
Absolutely.
need to be covered, that deal with the same issue?
Well, of course, the Native American community comes to mind. I have a friend who goes by the name of Masauki, which means deer, who is a follower of the Coahuiltecan shamanic path, who has shown me photographs of little stone figurines that he has found in the Mexican desert that have the almond eyes and that are quite ancient, and that are from Huichol people, and that they've had, you know, in their culture for hundreds of years. And of course, we know that, you know, this is something that is widespread now thanks to the work of the author Artie Six Killer Clark, whose work I highly recommend. She wrote 2 books, one about North American Indians and another one about Native Americans in Central America. They're both extraordinary. She's an extraordinary writer, great writer, Artie Six Killer Clark. And so there's this vast, vast knowledge that is out there, but the anthropological community hasn't really looked at it seriously because, again, it's outside the ken of what you can write a PhD thesis for and get a doctorate and get a job in a university for. Hopefully, maybe that'll change someday. I hope it will, needs to. But, and then beyond that, we have, of course, the military and the intelligence community. A lot of people in San Antonio. When I started writing the book, the Report on Communion, Air Force people came out of the woodwork and wanted to talk to me and told me extraordinary stories of, you know, witnessing. The late Marshall Dodge once told me a story of being in a superfortress flying over Bikini Atoll with 2 P-47s on either side, and a silvery disc comes in, and the pilot says, "What should we do?" The general looks at the lieutenant colonel looks at the master sergeant, had 2 PhDs, and the master sergeant says, "Well, they had hostile intent, we wouldn't be having this conversation." So they flew, got into the circular pattern, they started filming the bomb going off. As soon as the bomb went off, the aircraft went straight up. And this is from a guy who was a lieutenant colonel, you know, in Air Force intelligence, worked in the Pentagon, smart guy. He said I was the first guy I ever told a story to, because he didn't feel like he ever could before. And I had many other stories like that that came to me from San Antonio Air Force people, retired Air Force. You just start talking to people, though. And now, of course, we have in the NSA, the National Security Administration, in the CIA, there's a whole deep, deep, deep community of people who have been involved in this for quite some period of time. And so the skeptical community say, "Oh, there's nothing to this." All they need to do is just look at what's going on in the intelligence community. I mean, they're very intelligent. They know a lot about this.
Well,
So,
you know, I brought you here for a reason, and it's like a movie, and we are setting up the sequel.
Right.
So we're hoping that we're going to be able to do another Hidden Histories in the near future. And Ed, you can help us, particularly with the oldest communities that have dealt within the last 10,000 years with this. And I think that Luis's sculpture tonight is indicative of the long traditions. If you're following the show tonight, please see some of the figurines that Luis has created, and let's continue working on this idea that this is too big for network This is too big for cable, and if we do it this way through the internet, we can get a lot more stories out to the world. So we continue that ethos. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
and for
George.
helping me wrap this up. Now we have another Hidden Histories coming up on September 3rd, which is Labor Day, and we have a number of things that are going on with that event. The most prominent will be Ann Lewis, the documentary filmmaker who now lives in Austin. She will be coming in to talk about her new movie, which is about labor, and it's the new biography of Emete Nayuka and the pecan strike. And that will be, she'll come in on September 3rd. And we also will be doing our found photos process again, where we've been collecting short stories, 30 seconds, from people about what was your first job. So if you have a way to contact us here at Urban 15, send us a 30-minute clip on your phone in portrait format, and we would love to include your first job, how old were you, where it was. So that will be on September 3rd at 7 o'clock. Log in again, Hidden Histories. Okay, well, thank you very much. We've had a wonderful evening, and all of our guests have participated. The sequel, Space is the Place 2, soon. Thank you.